Welcome to the Empowered Birth series, where I go deep into everything that you need to know to plan and get your empowered, true, natural birth. And today I'm going to share 3 tips on how to ensure that your home birth happens. If you've been following along with this series, then you know that I'm going deep into the 26 things that you need to know if this is your first time planning a true natural birth. And number 3 on our list is that just because you plan a home birth doesn't mean that you're going to get a home birth. And this has nothing to do with your body or your limitations in being able to birth or even complications. Most home birth transfers are not emergencies. They typically happen because the limitations of home are no longer helpful in facilitating the kind of natural birth experience that mom wants. And some of my clients have even chosen to transfer from home to the hospital specifically so that they could get maybe a little tiny bit of intervention to help them along in their labor process. Sometimes labor is long. Sometimes you just want to get some sleep, and taking the epidural can take some of that pressure off of you so you can do that. Sometimes it's just a little jump start is needed. Sometimes you want a little bit more monitoring. There's a lot of reasons why you might want to transfer. However, one of the biggest regrets that I hear from a lot of moms who wanted to have a home birth and either for whatever reason they chose not to plan one, or they didn't think that they could have one, or even they decided last minute that they were going to go to the hospital, is that they realized that they could have stayed home if only they'd had the confidence. And that's really what this video is about. So the aim of the empowered birth method, again, is we aim for a true natural birth experience, and then we pull back only as needed. And if you're planning a home birth, again, you aim for home birth, and then you only use the backup of the hospital if you really, really need it. And as someone who had planned a home birth with her first baby, I can tell you just how easy it is to get tricked out of a home birth, because this is what happened to me. I was a first-time mom. I had been consuming birth for 9 months. I was reading all the books. I was very confident. But then at 35 weeks, something changed, and they said that my baby wasn't growing properly, and my confidences were chipped away at for weeks on end until finally I'm like, you know what? I should probably just have a hospital birth. I can have a home birth next time. And how many times do you hear that story in the mom groups where moms are like, I would have really loved a home birth, but for whatever reason, they didn't go for it. They were too scared. There's also the camp of the people that say, I would never do a home birth. My baby almost died. Always kind of look at those stories and wonder, maybe that might be the case, or maybe it's that they fell into the natural birth traps, which I'll talk about later in this video. If you've been following me for a while, then you also know that I do have my book, Your Empowered Birth, which does go into a home birth story. So if you want to check that out, it's on Amazon, or you can go into the playlists on my YouTube channel and check out the Empowered Birth book playlist, and I basically read that book to you. So there's different ways for you to get the same story, and home birth is one of my passions. In fact, I will never again birth in the hospital. Not unless my life depended on it, is my feelings on hospital birth. And maybe it's not so extreme for you, or maybe it is. Maybe you have been so traumatized by the hospital and you are determined to have a home birth. In which case, then these tips are really going to help you. Now, again, if you want to go deeper into things such as how to have an empowered, calm home birth, or if you would like to know more about how to cope with labor, then you might want to check out some of my older videos that I've done on the topic of home birth, because I did share some of my coping strategies for when I was in labor with my daughter. But for the overview of this video, I'm basically just going to go into how to ensure that you actually get your home birth. So the thing you need to understand is that there's really no such thing as risked out of home birth, because if you really think about it, if you were stranded in the middle of nowhere and there was no way of getting to a hospital, your baby is not going to care. They're going to come out. So there are moms that are told because you have had 3 cesareans, you are not eligible for a home birth, or because your baby is breech, you're not eligible for a home birth, or because you're a certain age, you're not eligible for a home birth, and all sorts of things. But again, the truth is that there's 2 ways that this can go. You either stay home until the last possible minute, decide that you'd rather just stay home the whole time, and eventually you birth your baby and they have to come to you, or you choose to go into the hospital again at the last possible minute and you birth your baby and everything turns out okay. If you need to call in that extra medical help a little bit earlier, you can do that. A hospital birth is really just a home birth transfer, no matter where you were originally planning to give birth. And biologically speaking, your body is designed to give birth where you feel safest. So if you really don't feel like the hospital is a safe environment for you, you're going to have a lot harder time being able to birth there, which is what I was thinking about when I was planning my natural birth. I knew I didn't want the epidural, and I knew that I definitely did not want a C-section. The thought of medical examinations during my pregnancy and birth terrified me. I didn't want the IV, and I really didn't want people up in my business. So this kind of led into my decision to birth at home. I said to myself, I would rather birth at home, and I'll endure the pain to avoid this traumatic hospital birth experience that I keep hearing from all my friends, because I don't want that. And I had seen it in the media, on TV, in movies, and I was absolutely terrified of natural birth because I thought that it was going to be painful, traumatic, and that I would have to leave my dignity at the door. So what basically happened, though, is in the course of learning about home birth and planning a home birth and hiring a midwife, I made some mistakes. And there's 7 of them that I lay out inside Your Empowered Birth. So you can go and check out that video on what I really did that caused me to have my home birth derailed the first time and how I reclaimed my birth the second time. But right now, I'm just going to go into the big 3. So tip number 1 for ensuring that home birth happens is you have to commit to it. The thing is that even if you're planning just a natural birth, you need to be able to commit to that too. Our entire birth culture and medical system is based on the idea that our bodies are defective machines that need help to birth. And this cannot be further from the truth. You are designed to birth, and your body will do it with or without permission and with or without help. However, because of what has been going on over the last several decades in maternity care, people don't see that. They only see the disasters waiting to happen. So you might have friends and family who, if you go and discuss your home birth plans, they're going to try to talk you out of it. And this is true even if you manage to have a completely natural birth in the hospital setting, and now you're thinking that you want to do a home birth, they might still try to discourage you. This happened to me. I was a birth advocate. I knew my stuff when it came to natural birth, and I had had a completely uneventful natural birth in the hospital. And yet my family still tried to discourage me. Now, this was also based on another traumatic experience where my former sister-in-law had had something go wrong in the hospital. And this then led to my in-laws basically saying, maybe it might be better if you plan a hospital birth because, with your sister-in-law's first birth, it didn't turn out like this, but the second one was a lot worse. And I said very plainly, that doesn't change my plans. I'm not changing my plans. I'm not going to the hospital. Now, I didn't say it in the most empowered stance. I actually said it in a very anxious way and a little bit of a combative, aggressive way because I was just done at that point. I had had a traumatic birth. I was fed up with everybody telling me what to do. I had already been screwed over once, and I was not as diplomatic as I now teach my clients to be. This then led to a lot of pushback, led to a lot of my relatives trying to go over my head and talk sense into my partner. But because I had a category 5 partner and he happened to be more into his own interests, I was able to get him on board. So, what you really want to do is, first of all, you have to be completely committed to your goals, no matter what the outside world says. And they're going to say a lot because home birth is only about 1 to 2% of the population. Most people are birthing in the hospital. So you're already birthing outside the box. Now, if you're also choosing to decline routine tests and examinations, if you're also planning a more holistic home birth, this is again way outside of the comfort zone of a lot of people. And they're going to try to push back and tell you all the things that could go wrong. In other words, they're going to try to push you into the fear traps. Make sure you check out some of my other trainings on fear traps to understand more about how to combat this. But basically, what you need to do is you need to be clear, have your mindset all figured out. It's like, I am having a home birth unless I change my mind. And the only way I'm changing my mind is if one of these hard lines in the sand come up. So you go through and you create your ideal birth vision for home birth. You create your backup plans for if something does need to change, and you're quite clear on which things are going to be deal breakers for that home birth where you're like, you know what, it's probably better if I go to the hospital now. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is that other people are going to try to project their own concerns, their own fears, and talk you out of staying home in labor, especially if it's long, especially if it's start and stop, especially if it doesn't follow the typical pattern that no labor actually follows, because it was based on the idea of one person who had one hospital who had done the cervix checks and said women progress at this point in labor, and anybody who doesn't gets Pitocin. So it was not a very good study. Friedman's curve was not a very good study. And unfortunately, our medical system bases labor stages on this study. They base it on this way of practicing. And it's very efficient for the medical system because they have a bottom line. It is not helpful if you are planning to have a true natural birth. Your labor is going to unfold in a myriad of different ways, and you could go fast. It could be slow and build up over a course of weeks and stop and start like mine did with my daughter. Or it could be gradual over 3 days, which again kind of happened to me, and it's happened with some of my clients. Or it could be something that's like just slowly building over the course of hours, but you get lots of sleep in between, even when you're pushing, like my client Rebecca, who you can read about inside Your Empowered Birth. So if you understand the true natural birth process and you understand that it could unfold any way, then you're less likely to think that just because labor is taking longer than it should, that there's a problem, and then you don't get transferred to the hospital. If you also recognize how to stay calm, your labor is going to hurt a lot less, and you're not going to go to the hospital. If you recognize that there are traps, and I'll tell you more about that later, you'll be able to spot them and stop everybody else from telling you that you can't have a home birth that you've risked out. So you need to commit to it, which means you have to get past your fear. And then you also need to enroll your partner, because your partner is the wild card. They are the closest one to you. Even your doula does not have as much pull as your partner when it comes to your birth. In fact, one of the things I do with my clients is I make sure that their partner is on board, because in the past, when I was just working with mom, sometimes I would just sit there shaking my head and I'd be like, oh my gosh, this partner is going to talk my client out of their home birth, and they're pushing them in a direction they're not supportive. And I could see it coming, and there was nothing I could do to stop it because I wasn't able to turn that around. When the partner is not on board, it's game over. So you need to get your partner on board. which again, I have other videos that talk about that on how to get your partner on board with your birth plan. So make sure that you check those out as well. You can also email me, hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com, or better yet, you can sign up for the Empowered Birth Toolkit. You go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/toolkit. That will get you on the newsletter. You'll be able to send emails to me as well and get more VIP support. Sometimes I even put trainings in on how to get your partner on board. So the Empowered Birth Toolkit is not stagnant. The only thing that stays the same inside of this toolkit is the birth advocacy report, which helps you understand how to get your care provider on board with your birth plan. And the way that you get your partner on board is very similar. However, there's a few differing factors in that. And at the same time, you can also go and get my paid program, Your Empowered Birth Academy, which does do a deep dive training on getting your partner on board. This is the fastest track way, aside from working with me directly, to be able to get everything that you need to know to plan and get a true natural birth. So once you have committed and once your partner is committed, then you're more likely to be able to go into tip number 2, which is ensuring that your care provider is on board. You need to know your midwife's limitations. So the thing that you need to understand is that even if your midwife loves home birth, loves to support home birth, they may still have limitations in how they're allowed to support home birth. If you want to know more about that, make sure you check out some of my other videos where I talk about how not all midwives are created equal and how to hire the right care provider for a true natural birth. But the basic overview of this is that you need to recognize that if your midwife has certain limitations on how they're allowed to support you, you need to be prepared to birth basically on your own. I'm not even going to sugarcoat this. One of the things that I recognized, even though I had a really good midwife and even though I knew all of my rights, was that when it came time for my labor, she still was under scrutiny. And she still had to practice a certain way. She had to enforce certain policies. And I knew when my labor stalled out that if I called her back too soon, she was going to have to assess my progress. And if I wasn't at the right number of centimeters dilated that the medical system would expect me to be as a second-time mom, putting me into that box, that this would then set up a whole bunch of alarm bells that didn't really need to be there. And the medical system would then tell the midwife, you have to transfer care now. You have to transfer her to an OB. And her hands would have been tied, especially since she had only been certified within the last few years. So I recognized this. And she said, if you go back into labor and you call me, I'll have to come back and assess you. So I made the choice, the conscious decision, to labor without her. And the thing you really need to understand is that labor isn't really a spectator sport. It's going to unfold and there's going to be stops and starts to it, possibly, or it might just be continuous. But for the most part, you really don't need anybody to do anything or touch you or try to mess with the process. A really good midwife is the one that Dr. Michelle Odant described, which is sitting in the corner knitting, not doing. So the more you have other people trying to do things, the more likely your labor is to stall. And this is what my experience was. And I recognized it because my labor was not progressing. It was kind of stalling out. And the doula was trying to get me to do all sorts of exercises. And the midwife was trying to get me to do all kinds of exercises. And I just remember at that point, I'm like, I wish they would just go home and leave me alone. So because of the fact that they were trying to get me to do, my labor shut down. And when I called the doula back, her job was very specific. Keep the pool warm. That was it. That's all she really had to do. I was in the pool. She kept it warm for me by filtering out the cold water and putting in more hot water as the pool started to cool down. And she fielded all of the calls that I had coming in. My mother even tried to call me at that time because she'd been worried about me going in and out of labor. And my partner at the time was also calling to check up on me while he was taking our son to swim lessons. So it was really just so that I wouldn't be alone while he was off with our son for swimming lessons. And then he came back, the doula went home, she got some more sleep, and I was just on my own. My partner wasn't doing much. He was sitting there on his phone talking to his mother. So I recognized in that moment, it's like, I can do most of this on my own. And since then, as a doula, when I am working with clients, I am a shadow in the background. I am just sitting there watching, observing. I'm not doing anything in that moment except holding space and presence and reassuring dad that things are okay so that he doesn't freak out as his partner is going through her motions. In the end, they have healthy babies and they did it themselves and they feel super empowered to do that. But because of the fact that so many doulas, they have dealt with a lot of trauma, and a lot of midwives too have dealt with a lot of trauma, there's that feeling that they have to act and they have to do something. And you don't want that if you're having a true natural birth. You want to be tuning into your instincts, not outside energy. So you need to make sure that whoever you're hiring understands that their role is really to sit on their hands and facilitate what's already happening. And you also need to be aware of any possible legal ramifications of them supporting you so that you can find the loopholes to get around that. In my case, I knew that if my midwife came back too early, that this would then cause her to get in trouble if she didn't transfer care. And I was not going to that hospital. There was no way. They would have had to drag me unconscious for how much I was not going to that hospital. I was 110% committed to home birth. And so what does my midwife do with that? That would cause her a lot of anxiety. So rather than put that on her, I gave her plausible deniability. I went back into labor. It was super fast. She got there within 10 minutes and the baby was almost out. It was precipitous, as they call it. Instead of the fact that I'd actually been in labor for 5 hours, I'd been doing it on my own, and I just didn't call the midwife because that was how I was able to help her get around that. The same thing is if they say that you're not allowed to have home birth for a breech, or you're not allowed to have home birth for a VBAC. Well, here's the thing is that accidental home births happen all the time, don't they? And how are they to know that it was planned or accidental? If somebody can give birth on the side of the road, and a lot of moms are like, when do I start going to the hospital because I don't want to give birth in my car? Well, you kind of know babies are born in cars, don't you? You kind of know that sometimes moms don't make it into the hospital room and they give birth in the hallway. Well, rather than have that stress of getting in the car and going to the hospital and birthing on the side of the road, what if you just stayed home? I mean, at least you're not in a cramped car. It's the same kind of situation. It's actually more comfortable to just stay home. If you're at the point of no return, just stay home. They'll still come to you. They have to. And I'm just going to also state at this point that there are skills in breech that even paramedics are learning. In fact, I have a friend who worked in that side of healthcare, and she said that they actually had to have that training. So if paramedics and even some other emergency responders have the training for breech, then why aren't doctors and midwives doing it? And some midwives have that skill set for breech, but they have been told by insurance or by policies that they aren't allowed to practice those skills. So the only way around that is if it is a emergency delivery. And maybe I'm being a little cheeky here, but what the industry doesn't know can't hurt you or your midwife. And the fact is that nothing is going to change in the medical system and the way that restrictions are being put on people unless we circumvent those rules and show that it can be done and that it's safe. Because when enough people break those rules, then you realize that the rules are stupid and don't belong there. And then you recognize that the rules were always stupid. It wasn't right that we even had those rules in the first place, and that rules were really just serving the industry, not the consumer. And how you change a society from being heavily medical to more holistic minded and respecting natural birth in all of its forms is, again, supply and demand. So if you don't like the way the hospitals are restricting you, the way around it is to stop playing the game. If you don't like the restrictions being placed on home birth, or you don't agree why you should be risked out of home birth, that's just a guideline. It has nothing to do with you. And if I had known that with my first pregnancy, when they said I had risked out and I'd stayed home anyway, I would have avoided a lot of stress and a lot of trauma and a lot of anxiety of having to go to the hospital. But then I wouldn't be here to tell you about all of the loopholes. So just be aware of what your midwife is really dealing with so that you can hire the right person. And again, go through some of my other videos on hiring a care provider and hiring the right midwife to know how to do that. Finally, number 3 on the list, stay away from natural birth traps. Now, if you know from my book, Your Empowered Birth, or from any of my content on my website, specifically the Natural Birth Traps Guide at empoweringmomsbirth.com/freebies, then you know that there are 20 natural birth traps that I warn moms about. One of them is vaginal exams. No midwife who truly facilitates true natural birth and truly believes in you and believes in birth and isn't afraid of birth is going to force you to have a vaginal exam. And you don't want them anyway, because they can really stall out your labor. They're uncomfortable. They can introduce infection. It can accidentally lead to your waters being broken. And it's one of those things you just don't want. Another natural birth trap you want to be watching out for is growth scans at the end of your pregnancy, because this is how I got tricked. I was told I was measuring too small. Then they decided my baby was small for dates. And then they said that because he was small for dates, I couldn't have a home birth. The opposite of that is if they say that your baby is too big and you can't have a home birth. Or another one that you want to watch out for is due dates. If they say that you're going past 42 weeks and are no longer eligible for a home birth, watch out, because the truth is, what are they going to do? Are they really not going to support you in labor if you happen to just say, I'm not inducing, I'm just going to stay here, and then all of a sudden you go into labor at 42 plus 3 days and you call them at the very last minute? Oh yeah, they're going to come to you. And even if they don't, you can catch your own baby. There's no rule saying that you can't. They're only there as backup. If you use the medical system as backup and not the default, you suddenly gain the confidence to do it. So if you are absolutely determined to have a home birth, this is what you really need to focus on. You have to recognize that there's a lot of natural birth traps out there. I can't possibly list them all, but I do have my top 20. You go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/freebies and get that guide. There's also cesarean traps. And you really need to recognize that these things have been used to perpetuate a medical model of birth. It does not work for home birth. Another really good way for you to be able to commit to home birth, avoid a lot of the fear and negativity around home birth, or even if your partner is like, well, what if something goes wrong? This book, Home Birth on Your Own Terms by Heather Baker, is one of my favorites to give my clients who are planning a home birth. In fact, typically when someone hires me as their coach and virtual doula, or even just their coach, I tend to gift this book to them in Kindle format so that they can highlight it and they can go through it. And then I reference certain things that they might want to look at in that book. And it's as part of my package that I give my clients at the highest level. So again, all you have to do is go to Amazon.com or CA, whichever one you happen to have, your local Amazon. Get Homebirth on your own terms. It does come in Kindle and it's also in paperback. And I mean, this book is basically my handbook when it comes to consulting anything that my client might be dealing with, either in early labor, active labor, or anything that they're even concerned about. I use this book as a constant resource. So you can check that one out. It's one of my favorites to use for home birth. It's like probably the best book that I've found on all the things that you need to know. The only kind of issue that I really have with it is that there's no chapters. So it's kind of tricky for me to find everything. And I have to really sift through that book. I didn't find a table of contents in there either. So there's no table of contents. You really just have to go to the index to find what you're looking for. However, if you go and read through that book, you'll see that there's stages of labor, there's the early pregnancy. If you're planning a wild pregnancy, this book is also incredibly helpful. That and the unassisted baby. And, you know, it's one of those little books that not everybody knows about. It's not as popular as Ina May's in the mom groups. Like most of the time when I say the name of this book, people are like, I've never heard about this one, but you're right. This is amazing. So again, it's called Homebirth on Your Own Terms by Heather Baker. And like this is, as I said, this is my guidebook. All right, so you now know my 3 biggest tips on planning and getting your home birth and ensuring that it actually happens. Because, as I said, you can easily be tricked out of it. It even happened to me. So when I was planning my home birth with my second, you better believe I was determined. I was committed to having a home birth. I also wanted to know every single limitation that my midwives had. I needed to know all of the medical system restrictions, their policies. I was constantly sifting through that, both as a client and also working within the Fraser Valley Birth Network as a fly on the wall in the doula and midwife community. And I was hearing their stories and I was looking for certain things. So when they would say that something had happened with a client where they had to transfer, I'm like, got it. So loophole is this. And I'd find all the loopholes along the way in these conversations because that's one of my talents is that somebody will say what the restriction is and I'll be like, oh, well, then I know the way around that. I'm a bit of a rule breaker, as you know. And this serves my clients well because they always get what they want. If they want to avoid a C-section, they avoid a C-section unless they decide later that it's actually necessary, but it's 100% their decision. And most of the time, what happens is they end up having a true natural birth. They end up going beyond the expectations of what anybody else thought that they could do. They do it unassisted in the hospital. They do it unassisted at home. Rebecca herself was a home birth after 2 previous C-sections. We tried to find a midwife. There were no midwives in the area that were going to attend home birth. So she knew that she would need to do it on her own. And I followed the same logic. And this is kind of where you might want to get your partner on board to start thinking about home birth. This is one of my little extra tips. So here's how it works. Your partner says, I think it's better if we stay in the hospital because what if something happens? And you're like, okay, I hear you. However, if we were driving off to the hospital, what happens if baby's coming super fast and we have to pull over to the side of the road? And then that would kind of get them thinking, well, I guess we would be having a baby and emergency people would show up and help, or we'd be doing it ourselves. You say, okay, yep. And okay, so what if we got to our driveway and baby was coming now? then what would happen? Well, I guess they would have to call the ambulance and we would be having a baby by ourselves. You'd be like, yep. And then what happens if we get to the front door? Well, I guess we're having a baby. Uh-huh. So what if we just set up a pool and we had people that were already on their way to us because we had already planned it that way? And what happens if they just don't arrive in time? Well, I guess we'd have a baby. It's like, okay, awesome. So what if they did arrive on time? It's like, why don't we just plan a home birth? And however it ends up unfolding, it'll be okay. And you slowly inch them back towards recognizing that birth is a physiological process, not a medical one. And they start to slowly get more comfortable with the idea that maybe they could catch their own baby. And, from the experiences of the dads that I have supported in this, there's just nothing like them being able to catch their baby or be able to witness that birth and be like, you know what? That was everything. And one of my clients had even said, like, we were robbed of our first two birth experiences and we were able to reclaim it back with our third. So if you are committed to home birth already, but your partner is not yet on board, then I do invite you to check out some of my other videos on getting your partner on board, or just go get your Empowered Birth Academy, where I lay out the entire framework for you. I lay out some of my secret techniques to getting your partner more open to the idea of home birth, so that then they become your biggest supporter against your family and friends who are trying to talk you out of it, and even pushing for your care provider to start supporting you better, because that is the key. The key of the empowered birth method is we aim for true natural birth. We create our backup plan. Then we work through all of our fears that have come up as we've created that birth plan. And then once we've worked through our fears, we work through the partner's fears. And then the partner is now your rock, and you go in and you stand against the medical system, and then you enroll the people that are more willing to support true natural birth, but have those restrictions placed on them, like midwives who wish that they could use their breech skills, but they're told that they're not allowed. And they would like to support you with a more holistic physiological birth, but they also happen to have restrictions placed on them by the governing health authorities. And this is basically how you can change things around, by using these methods. So again, all you have to do is go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/academy and check that out. Or if you're more inclined to do it yourself and you don't want to pay for a course at this point in your journey, I do have a free path available where all you need to do is like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Go and watch all the other videos. Find all of the magic that I scatter everywhere. Make sure you also sign up for the Empowered Birth Toolkit, which is my weekly newsletter, plus the Google Drive that I put things in, I take things out, so that you will constantly have a rotation of resources to help you have a true empowered birth. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me at hello@empoweringmomsbirth.com. And either myself or someone on my team will be there to assist you within 1 to 2 business days. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Happy empowered birth journey, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye now.